friends, welcome to my YouTube channel Story Explorer. I am your host Tomoji Chatterjee. So friends, today we will continue the series of Wolf Children by Mike Samuda. So without further ado, let's get started. The Reverend Singh continued to dig, and eventually his efforts revealed a pathetic sight. Four trembling creatures lay in a ball of fur and hair. The ball was made up of two wolf cubs and two little girls. Singh had never seen children like these before. They were almost unrecognizable as human beings. They snarled and bit his hand as he tried to separate them from the cubs. Singh took the two girls to the orphanage at Midnapur, now Mednipur. His wife, who helped run the orphanage, could hardly believe her eyes as she watched the wolf children. Both had thick, rough skin on their hands, knees, and elbows because they moved on all fours. When they wanted to go a short way, they used their knees and elbows, but when they wanted to run, they would travel using their hands and feet. Mrs. Singh gave them each a dish of milk when they lapped up with their tongues. When she tried to touch them, they growled and snapped at her hand. The girls were given the names Kamla and Amla. Kamla means lotus flower and Amla means bright yellow flower. It was clear that Kamla was several years older than Amla, and Mrs. Singh guessed that Kamla might be 8 years old. The Singhs had no way of telling whether the two girls were sisters or not, and they had no idea how they had come to live with the wolves. It seemed a miracle that they had survived in the jungle for so long. The Reverend Singh decided that the discovery of the children should be kept a secret. His wife agreed that this was best for the girls. It was a secret that the Singhs were not able to keep for long. When Mrs. Singh tried to give the girls their first bath, the orphanage echoed with the howls. Soon, the talk of the wolf children spread through Midnapur. The first lesson that Kamla and Amala had to learn was that they were not wolves. This was far more difficult than Mrs. Singh had imagined. Although she deliberately played with other children in front of Amla and Kamla, she could not get the wolf girls to behave like humans. For weeks, they ignored the games and laughter of the children. Instead, they preferred to crouch in the shade or stand motionless with faces to their wall. Only at night did they become active, when they would howl eerily and hurl themselves at the wall in an attempt to escape. They would only feed like wild animals, taking raw meat and liquids which they would eat and drink in a crouching position. When Mrs. Singh gave Amla and Kamla toys to play with, they simply chewed as if they were bones. Whenever people went near them, they snarled and arched their backs, shaking their heads backwards and forwards. One little orphan boy tried to make friends with the wolf girls. When they decided to play with him, they treated him like a wolf cub. Mrs. Singh had to rush over and rescue him from the playful attack. Educating the girls became a big problem. Even after months in the orphanage, no progress was made. It was clear that the girls did not think like humans. For them, it was more natural to behave like wolves. Then, both of the girls fell seriously ill, and sadly, Amla died of kidney disease on 21 September 1921. For Kamla, the younger wolf girl's death was a terrible setback. She howled for many days and refused to eat. All she would do was sniff round for Amla's scent. Gradually, Kamala turned to Mrs. Singh and slowly began to respond to the woman's patience and kindness. At last, she started to eat cooked meat, and the day came when she made her first human sound. Mrs. Singh massaged Kamala's thin legs every day. This was done so that Amla could stand upright. Early in 1922, she could walk on her knees and a few months afterwards rose up on her two legs for the first time. It was a wonderful moment for Mrs. Singh, who had patiently spent hours with Kamla. The Reverend Singh was also delighted. He held out his arms like a proud father as Kamla took her first few faltering steps. Mrs. Singh was pleased with Kamla for another reason. She could see from Kamla's expression that she was happy to have pleased the Reverend Singh. No longer she was the terrible wolf child. Now Kamla began to trust humans. She would bound towards Mrs. Singh when it was time for her to have her milk, and she would enjoy rides on the swing. She became too used to wearing a dress, and she tried to learn to speak. Kamla understood most of the things that was said to her, but she spoke very little herself, so she managed by 1929 to learn about 50 words. In the orphanage garden, she started talking to the flowers and animals. When she thought nobody could hear, she would sing lots and lots of little phrases. For hours, she would sing away to her audience of chickens, goats, and puppies, and trees. Then Mrs. Singh was forced to leave the orphanage for several weeks. Her aunt was seriously ill. Kamla couldn't understand why Mrs. Singh had left her. For 2 weeks, she went back to her old ways. She sat in a dark corner, swaying backwards and forwards. She refused her food. She stopped singing to herself. At last, Mrs. Singh returned. Quick, Kamla! Mama has come! Someone cried. The words acted like magic. Kamla ran to greet Mrs. Singh. Both were overjoyed to see each other. Kamla refused to let go of Mrs. Singh's hand for the rest of the day. At night, the Reverend Singh sat in his study writing up his notes. As he finished writing, he smiled to himself. Kamla had learned something more important than how to walk and talk. She learned herself how to love a human being. On 14 November 1929, Kamla died as Amla had done of kidney failure. She was greatly mourned by the Sais and the rest of the children in the orphanage. Thank you for watching, friends. We will meet in the next video. Till then, like, share, and subscribe. Thank you, friends. Underneath the bridge, tempest sprung a leak, and the animals have tried.